Okay, well, we are going to continue on with our special guest speakers of the day, the moment that you guys have all been waiting for, the second half of our program. Our next speaker is someone who I feel like I just met. I did. She's great style, by the way. Prints are in, you'll see. And I feel like I connect with her on a deep level because she loves Halloween just as much as I do. I looked at your Instagram and I was like, oh my gosh, you must be married to a good guy. Like he's my husband too. I can tell. And now I have another Instagram account to show my husband, be like, this is why you need to put tights on, or this is why you need to do this. Because we are crazy. We have a whole costume room, a whole wig room, and it's just a part of our life now. And I just love to see it. Somebody love that just as much as we do. And also, I had read that you growing up actually preferred watching C-SPAN over Nickelodeon. That was true. Okay. Oh, you didn't have Nickelodeon, or no. And that's another thing, because I thought about it and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember when growing up, I had posters of General Schwarzkopf and Eisenhower on my walls instead of Joey Lawrence and Jason Priestley. And it's really amazing how the way you grow up shapes the way that you are. And I didn't get into West Point, obviously, because I went to George Mason University, but it all worked out, right? So, but I still love our military and support them in any way that I can. But I love that little nugget of information. So, more about our Congresswoman joining us today. Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan entered the U.S. Congress. I know some of you saw her already, got your picture. Back in 2023, this after winning a special election to replace the late Congressman A. Donald McEachin, the first Black woman elected to Congress from the state of Virginia. She serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, where she focuses on expanding access to affordable health care, sustainably and affordably meeting the nation's energy needs, closing the digital divide, and protecting freedom of the press. Fourth estate, thank you for that. A lifelong Virginia native, McClellan served in the Virginia House of Delegates from 2006 to 2017, and in the Virginia State Senate from 2017 to 2023. Now, during this time, pretty phenomenal when you look at the numbers, more than 370 pieces of legislation passed while she is in office, including landmark bills to protect and expand voting rights, combat climate change, protect reproductive freedom, expand access to affordable health care, enhance worker protections, and also ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment. That's a lot. And she's a mama. And she dresses up as the Queen of Hearts. By the way, I dressed up as the Queen of Hearts too. And so you know red from that's probably the reddest you've ever been, by the way. Red descendants, red, 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 red. Yeah, she gets it, right? Congressman McClellan lives in Richmond, but traveled all the way up here to be with us, with obviously her very, very dedicated and understanding husband, David, I can tell from the photos, and their costumes, and their two wonderful children. And we are so, so happy to welcome her once again to the conference to speak with all of you today. Everyone, Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan.
Thank you, Angie. Yes, I was red and I've been Elphaba. And if you look on my Instagram, you will at Jen McClellan VA, you will see all the wonderful costumes I've been over the past almost 20 years. But I am here for a couple of reasons. First of all, to tell you how much I love Mark Warner. I am here on my wedding anniversary. And 17 years. I do have a wonderful husband. He dropped me off. He's got the dog in the car. He's gonna pick me up. We're gonna go have an amazing weekend. But we use this opportunity to come to Northern Virginia to celebrate because we both love Mark Warner so much. That's right, and Virginia is for lovers. But I did want to shout out my wonderful, understanding husband who did not sign up to be a congressional spouse, but life is what happens when you're making other plans, especially for women. But I am, while I never dreamed that I would be in Congress, I actually went to law school wanting to be a lawyer to a congressional committee, because sometimes women don't dream big enough. And now I have the incredible honor, as that kid that did watch C-SPAN when we got cable finally, who read the history books and never saw anyone who looked like me in this government by, of, and for the people, who was captivated as a kid by an extraordinarily revolutionary idea that the power of government derives from the people, but also recognizing at a young age that those founding documents didn't include me, to now serve as the first Black woman from the former capital of the Confederacy, from the birthplace of American democracy, is the honor of a lifetime. And to tell you how rare it is, you heard Angie say that I'm a mom. Only about 7% of members of Congress are moms to children under the age of 18. About 3.5% are moms of color to children under the age of 18. And yet in a government by, of, and for the people, what that means is government only reflects the perspective of and therefore meets the needs of the people who participate. And for so long, the story of our country has been, how do we expand who can participate to include everyone so that everyone has the ability to have liberty and justice as promised in our founding document. And that means you're part of the process. Now, we are seeing our republic be stress tested to the breaking point. We all feel it. We all see it. We see the progress that we have made under attack. We feel frustrated that we're fighting the same fights as our mothers, our grandmothers, and our great-grandmother. But I'm here to say, be joyful in that fight, because we are fighting those fights from a position of more strength and power than our ancestors ever dreamed. And we fight those fights so that our children, our daughters, our granddaughters, our great-granddaughters, and our sons, and our non-binary children, because we don't want them to have to fight those fights, but if they do, they don't have to go as far as we do. I am extraordinarily proud to be in that fight with another lover of Halloween who served this Commonwealth as governor, our 69th governor. I think he still misses the way he was addressed when he walked into the room. Sometimes just to make him feel good at the Virginia delegation luncheons, when he comes in, we're just like, oh, Your Excellency. I'm extraordinarily proud to be in that fight with him. He has been a mentor from my days as a young Democrat. He continues now to be a mentor. He is a source of really good gossip. And he fights every single day to make sure that our government by, of, and for the people includes everyone. And that's why he does this women's conference, to make sure that we are addressing, yeah, because we're equal, but we're not the same. And he wants to make sure that when he represents us in Washington, that he understands our perspective. And it makes him a better senator. It makes our country better. It makes our Commonwealth better. And I know, just like he does, that somewhere in this room is the next generation of leaders who are going to make our Congress, if you decide to go there or whatever you decide to do, you're going to make the halls of power more reflective of the diversity of the Commonwealth and the country that we serve. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the 69th governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. More importantly, the senior senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia, Senator Mark Warner.
All right. Thank you, Jen McClellan. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am proud to be one of Jen's mentors. We used to have this running routine. I actually have been doing Halloween as well. My oldest daughter's 36. My middle daughter's 32. My youngest is 31. We live in Old Town Alexandria, Lisa and my wife and I. So I'm surrounded by a household of women. I also am surrounded at work by a household or an office of strong women. My chief of staff's a woman, my communications director is a woman, my press secretary is a woman. You know, everybody has met Lou and many of the folks on our staff. And so learning from wise women is something I'm pretty good at. And I've seen in Jennifer McClellan somebody who, yes, she was a little bit nerdy as a young Dem. And since I've been former chairman of the Democratic Party, I actually claim how she met her husband. And the fact that you're on your 17th anniversary here, kind of weird, but God bless you. And I don't want to make predictions as somebody who's got, I'm going to ask you to hire me one more time next year. But Jennifer McClellan is the kind of person who has statewide and national capabilities. So please keep an eye on Jennifer McClellan. I got a couple of questions. How many of you, is this your first women's conference? Oh, very good. So I got to tell at least one or two of my old stories. How many of you here have been veterans and served in the military? Wow, thank you for your service. We can never fully repay that. How many of you, because we're going to talk a little bit about this as well, have either ever served in public office from school board to local elected official or hope to serve in public office at some point? Raise your hands. Thank you as well. And this is what this conference is about. We've done this 13 times all over the Commonwealth. This is the first time we've done it in Northern Virginia. And a special shout out to George Mason, great hosts. And I know he's here to welcome you this morning, President Washington, who is an extraordinarily, I think, strong president of the university, has stood up, recognizing that George Mason is going to be stronger if we actually look like the community of Northern Virginia. We are the most diverse part of Virginia and Northern Virginia. And the fact that he is under assault for trying to have this university look like Northern Virginia and Virginia is a real challenge, but he is staying strong. That's what. And what started me on these conferences, beyond having my wife and kids say, Dad, come on, get your stuff together, is I think I am self-aware enough, at least a little bit self-aware. And like, for those of you like Jen who've heard the story 1,000 times, I'll make the shorty version. Before I got involved in politics, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, went on to law school, got out of law school, worked in politics for a year or two. Then I decided I was going to become a business guy. Took my life savings, $5,000, invested it in this little energy startup company, went to work for that company. In 6 weeks, I helped that company go totally bankrupt. I then went in to real estate, moved to Atlanta for a while, started a business there. 6 months later, I'd failed at that. So at the ripe old age of 27, I was flat broke, student loans coming due, living out of my car, and sleeping on my law school classmates' couches. And I got a third try with cell phones back in 1982. That was when they were cool, young ladies, and managed to do very well. But I realized then, but even more as I went into politics later, that, America's a great place, but I probably wouldn't have gotten 3 chances or 2 chances or even 1 chance if I hadn't been a white man with the appropriate education. And the promise of America ought to be, we can't guarantee you success. But for damn right, every American ought to have that chance, that fair shot, to live out their own version of the American dream. And if we empower everyone, women, people of color, different faith backgrounds, different political backgrounds, we're going to be stronger. Think about Angie's great energy she's brought. I just want to thank Angie and Becky Fremel, who've been our MCs. They've done a great job. Thank you. I do want to return quickly to the Halloween. Jen's dressed up in different costumes. Angie has. I'm always a mad chef. And we have a side patio in Old Town. People line up for 45 minutes to get to our house. We've got spooky music and smoke. And I give kids either candy, or the really brave ones get candied eyeballs and have to put their hand in this goopy spaghetti and come out with a candied eyeball. And we count how many kids we make cry. But we will see, one year they say, I was too scared to try it last year. This year we tried it. And we end up with like 2,800 to 3,000 kids each Halloween. A lot of candy. But we actually get to see the community. And it's a great, put me in the category of Halloween fans. So far, has the conference been good? Yeah. And I want to thank all of you. I know we've got folks from Hampton Roads, we've got folks from Richmond, all came out to be part of this. And it is really extraordinary that when women can learn from women and network is so, so important. And if we think back, last year we did it in Roanoke. Long live Southwest, yeah. And when we were thinking a year ago, and this is not a political, but this is kind of my comment on where we are and the state of the world and the state of our country. I don't think any of us could have predicted this year. I mean, we'd all lived through, President Trump's first term, and there were lots of things I disagreed with, but generally speaking, he had people in his administration that were relatively decent. I can't say that this time. And it's just not normal. And I see a lot of this. I'm chairman of the Intelligence Committee, now I'm vice chairman. When I see our intelligence community being undermined, when we see generals being fired because they, won't do what the president wants, when I see, could you even imagine, like, if you were a senior spy at the CIA and President Trump comes in and they say, all right, we've got a new plan. Here's our new foreign policy. Russia's our friend and Canada's the enemy. You go, no, but that's kind of how this is played out. I frankly, and again, to the veterans in the room, thank you. I think the best news that's happened in the last couple of months, as we've seen, law firms bend the knee, businesses bend the knee, TV shows bend the knee, everywhere. The one group that didn't bend the knee so far was our military. When they brought our generals and admirals to Quantico, and as opposed to doing the kind of, yay, yay, Trump, they sat there and was clear. Their obligation was to the Constitution, not to any individual. And the fact is, over these next coming months, I think we may all be asked, not maybe for physical courage, but for moral courage, to willing to stand up and say, no, this is not the kind of country we want. We can agree, or I can acknowledge, I think when the Democrats were in control, we kind of screwed up the border. But screwing up the border and trying to do border security doesn't mean that you have masked ICE agents picking up moms as they drop off their kids for daycare. It doesn't mean you randomly pick people up. Matter of fact, the ICE budget now is bigger than the FBI's budget. And if you want to get really kind of like, and this is not a joke, this is kind of the reality of where we are. It used to be an ICE agent, to get trained, it would take 7 or 8 months. They're trying to hire a bunch of new ICE agents. The new training program for an ICE agent is 47 days. And Corinne, you might say, why 47 days? Because Donald Trump's the 47th president. I kid you not. This is not my official speech, but I figure after, we got to not get the official stuff. So this is why we have to keep fighting. I mean, the fact that this big, awful bill, and you've not even seen the worst parts, decided to take away Medicaid from millions of people, food assistance from millions of people. They had most of that kick in after next year's elections. but people are already starting to feel it. Hospitals in the western part of the state are already shutting down their clinics. And while I'm glad we're out of the shutdown, I didn't vote to get out because we cannot give up on the health care of millions of Americans. And if there was any question about how downright cruel this crowd is, we see it with people, the moms getting picked up, dropping off kids. But this administration would rather go to the Supreme Court to try to deny the 1 out of 8 Americans that get food assistance. That's not politics, that's cruelty. And we are better than that. And you know what? And I'm not, again, I don't care you're Democrat, Republican, independent, libertarian, vegetarian. I don't care what your views are. But I do think Virginians said in a pretty loud voice 10 days ago, no, that is not who we are as Virginians. That is not who we are as Americans. And I'm pretty damn proud that Abigail Spanberger is going to be our next governor. I'm pretty damn proud that Ghazala Hashmi is going to be our next lieutenant governor. And that means we have to, the fight's not over. There are days I think, oh my gosh, what in the heck am I still doing in this stuff? Partially because I want to make sure that the next generation of leaders like Jen and the potential leaders in this room get their fair shot. Part of it is to continue to push back on national security, on healthcare, and these other items. And there are so many things in the next year or two. Let me tell you a couple of things that I think we as Virginians, as Americans, ought to be about. And again, my apologies for the folks who kind of wrote the normal stuff. Jen, since you got not less normal, I'm going to get less normal too. And again, I want to be, the venue maybe is not right, but the people who want to raise their concerns about Gaza, they have every right in the world to do that. But we got to recognize how this is going to change for us and our kids. Candidly, I think it's time in this country, rather than arguing about expanding coverage or contracting coverage, that we have comprehensive health care in this country. And then we could actually move to how we make that healthcare system better. Because Lord knows, Obamacare's got lots of problems with it. But if we start with the basis that everybody ought to start with healthcare, then we can actually focus on bringing down costs. I think it's also time to recognize, particularly for our kids, that they're not going to go work for the same job for 40 years, 40 hours a week, the way my dad worked. They're going to move from job to job. I think with every job in Virginia and America, whether you are an Uber driver or a gig worker, a software entrepreneur, it ought to come with benefits. And those benefits ought to be portable as you move from one job to another. That's a whole different concept. But it's time to be more audacious. I think one of the things, again, I'm a tech guy. The cell phone stuff back when I got into it, people thought that was wild. I'd been lucky enough to go to Harvard Law School, so my friends were all at these fancy law firms. I went to all of them. Now remember, young ladies, this is 1982. I'm not going to ask how many of you were born, at that period of time. But they all said, Warner, you're so stupid. Get a real job. Who's going to want a cell phone? They're still practicing law. So artificial intelligence, I don't know what all it's, I'm sure that there's going to be great things. But I tell you what I'm terrified about right now. And I say this with trepidation with these beautiful young women here, is that one thing AI is going to do, it's going to destroy, at least in the short term, a lot of jobs that initially people will get coming right out of college. The big banks have already cut their internship programs in half. They've cut their first-year hires in half. They're going to cut them in half again next year, I know. We already have 9% unemployment of recent college graduates. My fear is that could go to 25%, literally before 2028. And if we got a quarter of all our kids coming out of school without a job, not only does that do great damage to those young people, what about the parents who picked up $50, $100, $200,000 worth of student debt? So my idea is, let's go to the AI tech bros, and they all are all bros. There are not many women in that group. Say, you guys are so smart, fine. Maybe there will be AI jobs coming out of this, but there's going to be a 5-year gap. You help us figure out how to get retrained and actually pay for it as well, because you're making trillions of dollars. There ought to be an obligation that you put some of that back in terms of investing in people. You know, not that radical, but the idea that we ought to treat investment in human beings the same way we treat investment in a computer. You know, you invest in a computer, you get a tax break, you get an asset. You invest in a human being, you don't get any of those benefits. We got to be audacious at this point. And when we think back, just in Virginia, there was, I was trying to reflect back on some of the, Virginia women heroes. There are two that have kind of always hit me in my life. One is a woman named Barbara Johns. And Barbara Johns, who I'm proud that my wife put the first statue of a person of color, a female, children on Capitol Square in Richmond. Barbara Johns was a young woman almost exactly my age that in Farmville, in Prince Edward County, said, you know what? The black school, high school, Moton High School there, was so far behind that she led a student walkout in 1951. Now, the community in Prince Edward said, the ministers said, well, it may not be time to do that. Let's move slower. Well, as Doug Wilder used to say, if it's the right time, if it's the right thing to do, it is always the right time. And Barbara Johns led that walkout, and that case became part of Brown versus Board of Education. Matter of fact, it was done in an non-alphabetical way. It was one of the first ones. It would have been the Farmville case would have been known as, not Brown versus Board of Education. But to have that kind of courage against her own community, but to say, no, this is just not right. And frankly, Prince Edward County, after that, shut down their public schools rather than integrate. We've got a lot of things to be proud of in Virginia, but one of the dark blots was something called massive resistance, where, and I got to tell you folks, it wasn't just in Southside. It was Norfolk. It was in Northern Virginia as well, where schools shut down in the 1950s rather than integrate. Barbara Johns was the kind of woman leader that I think is in this room. The other is one that I only learned about, and I had the honor to meet a number of times, named Katherine Johnson. Katherine Johnson was the person, one of the people focused in the film Hidden Figures. She and a number of African-American women were able to do the hardcore math that started out our space program. And in the film, there's this great time when John Glenn, who's going to be a first astronaut, says the computer wasn't working that well. She says, no, I want Katherine Johnson and these women to do the math. But that ability, again, to say, I'm going to surprise you, but my skills and talents, and I'm going to do something that's unexpected. To think to be not only a woman, but a black woman at NASA in the late 50s and 60s. So we have so many leaders like that in Virginia. Many of them are going to be in this room because women leadership is always about more compassionate leadership, fairer leadership. Women are actually more measured on getting shit done. Excuse me, ladies. I have been told that the more I cuss, the bigger my social media following will become. Hey, that's an insider tip. So so all of you on your postings, you can saying, Senator told me to cuss more on my page. So, and we're in one of those moments. Women leadership, I see it where I work. They're not always the loudest, but they're the ones that get stuff done. And that's kind of what this whole conference is about. How women can talk to women, and whether your career wants to be in finance and business, whether it wants to be in caring, whether it wants to be I know there was a group out there around creative arts. Creative arts may be one of the areas that AI can't touch, whether it is about standing up and being involved. And that's where I'll close, because St. Marshall is coming up. We're going to have a great person who's going to introduce our George Mason women's basketball coach. But one of the things I heard about our keynote speaker and her friend Valeria is all three of us were born on December 15th. All Sagittarius. I don't think or her friend were born in the same decade as I was on December 15th, but it all kind of works out. So the point I will leave you with is this. If you're here, I know I'm preaching to the choir. And the couple points that I want to just leave with you are, these are not normal times in terms of our politics, in terms of our community, in terms of the polarization. I actually think if we can break through to each other, we're not as divided as some of our political leaders want us to be. But that takes courage to have those hard conversations with friends and family that may totally disagree with you. We also got to make sure that each of you, follow your own American dream. I hope that will mean for many of you that you'll run for office at some point, that you'll get involved. And even if running for office is not your choice, fine. You've got to at least vote. This stuff is too important to leave to the politicians. And what I come out of this with, I had a fairly fancy speech here, which, yeah. Oh, I do want to thank one thing before I close very quickly. All of the team folks from the Warner office who put this conference together. Could they all rise? The staff in the room, Cynthia, Aaron, thank you, thank you, thank you. 13 times we've done this. If I get rehired, if I get retired, we're going to at least do another 7 years of this. And I promise this is my last time. But if we're here, no, not for the conference. But if we're here with all the challenges in this country, in our Commonwealth, if we're here, chances are, with all the flaws and biases in our system, the system has still been all right to us. And that's why we got to fight to push back against those who are cruel, to push back against those who want to take away the notion of democracy, who push back on those who, as Jen so much represents in a person, that were not included when the documents were found. Were not included as recently in Virginia as the 1950s. Because if we all stay involved, then the best days for Virginia, the best days for our country, the best days for your family are in front of us. So I thank you for being here. I thank you for your willingness to listen. I'm looking forward to our keynote speaker. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the shy and retiring Angie.
Thank you so much, Senator. I have heard about your Halloween gig, by the way, your Halloween party, and I heard about the lines. And so we need to get a fast pass. Like at Disney World, you go and you get a fast pass. So you guys need to start offering those, okay?
Women's Conference gets a fast pass next year on Halloween.
Get it on tape, y'all. Yeah, no, it's a big thing. They always talk about Senator Warner's big Halloween party, but with 4 kids, I can't do a line for more than an hour. It drives me crazy. But now we're all getting fast passes. So I told you, better than a Labubu. Okay.